All right, welcome back to episode 15 of The Pit. I'm Drew Pavon here in Columbus, Georgia for your Georgia Regional Sports Show. I'm joined by Joseph Doring out at WRDW in Augusta, Georgia, and of course Ryan Kelly down in Tallahassee, Florida. Guys, a lot to talk about in this upcoming week. Georgia baseball, Georgia Tech baseball, Georgia softball getting to host a regional after an impressive SEC tournament performance. We've got to start with the Dogs, though. Winning the SEC regular season title. Joe, I'll start with you. What have you thought about the baseball going on in Athens this year?
Yeah, I think it's incredible. Wes Johnson in his third year as head coach, on pace to host Georgia's third straight regional since he's been there. And this is the first regular season title that the Dogs have taken home since 2008. Coincidentally, that was the last time that Georgia was able to make it to Omaha. So history seems to always repeat itself. Let's hope that this is the year for the Dogs to be able to finally get back to the promised land. But I'm just loving what I'm seeing so far. 9-game win streak going into the SEC tournament later next week, and it just couldn't be a better time right now to be a Dogs fan, rooting on some good baseball there. I've loved what I've seen from the pitching staff. We're going to get to Georgia Tech in just a minute, but the Dogs only played one game against the Yellow Jackets this year, and it was the Yellow Jackets taking home that victory. But Georgia's pitching staff outside of that has looked extremely phenomenal as they've gone along the whole season, not to mention the complementary offense that they've played, which has helped keep them in these high-score shootouts that we have seen in several games this season. We talked earlier this year when we kind of first started the Pit how Georgia was going to kind of look this season, and I don't know if any of us projected that the Dogs would have as good of a season as they have had this year. Coming off a sweep against LSU, that's no easy feat. We haven't seen the Tigers be as good as they have been in recent years, but going down to Baton Rouge and sweeping the Tigers is always a good feeling for them. So loving what I'm seeing so far out of Georgia baseball.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you hit 138 home runs on the season, it definitely helps, and you lead all of college baseball at that stat. But like you said, the pitching staff has slowly developed as the season's gone on. Obviously, you look at the box score and their numbers over the season. They have a ERA of 5 total as a team, and you know how this SEC is. This league is deep with power pitching, especially a team that you face later in this week at Auburn, which is going to be a top 5 matchup and a great way to end the year before you head to Hoover for the SEC tournament. Ryan, how do the Dogs just impress you so far, and can they keep this peak win streak going into the SEC tournament?
Well, pitching and power, you absolutely said it. And when you play in a ballpark like Foley Field that plays as small as it does sometimes, I mean, feed the trees is a slogan for a reason, right? You want guys that can hit balls, and you want pitchers that don't allow a lot of home runs and don't allow a lot of things. Wes Johnson has done such a phenomenal job recruiting to what this park is and what this program is. Because let's face it, there's been no reason for Georgia baseball to be as inconsistent as they've been since they made that College World Series final back in 2008 and fell to Fresno State. This is a team and a program that seems built for success. Georgia is such a talent-rich, baseball-loving state. So for Johnson to now come in, recruit what he's done, what is it now? I'm looking at the stats right here. It's 6 guys with double-digit home runs. You already said it. They lead the NCAA. They have so many power bats, an ERA under 5. I cannot wait for this series against Auburn this weekend. I got a chance to go out to Arlington with Florida State earlier this year when they played Auburn as a part of one of those tournaments. That was a really impressive team. They ended up digging out of an early hole. Florida State ended up going up 4-0, and then they walked them down and won that game. So I'm interested to see Dogs and Tigers, and I'm also interested to see, no matter what happens from here on out with Georgia, what happens with them as far as postseason positioning. Because yes, the SEC regular season champions, that holds a lot of weight, especially considering the traditional power that the SEC has. But you look at RPI, fellas, and you see a team that's about mid-teens. I'm kind of interested to see how that works out. I know D1 has them projected as the 3 seed overall, ironically, just 1 seed behind Georgia Tech. So I want to see how the Dogs kind of figure out these last 2 weeks playing against Auburn and what's sure to be one of the conference series of the year in the SEC. And then, of course, the SEC tournament in Hoover. How does that shake out before Selection Monday comes around?
Absolutely, and the SEC tournament will start next week in Hoover, Alabama. But the team in Athens having a great year, but the team in Atlanta having, I'd argue, even a better year, historic year on the flats right now for Georgia Tech. I think they're number 3 if the polls came out today, if I'm correct with that. They're sitting on 3 according to D1 Baseball. They lead the nation in average with 358, RBIs, OBP. Pitching staff's great. They're riding high. They're ripping through everyone in the ACC over the past 4 series, and they continue just to play great baseball. Kind of easy slate to end the year before they get into that ACC tournament. Joe, what have you thought about the Yellow Jackets this year in a historic year on the Flats?
Yeah, we talked about it before the beginning of the season, and it was the fact that they have all these super seniors for Georgia Tech, and my oh my have they stepped up, because the Yellow Jackets are cruising as of late. 42-8 on the season. As you just talked about, Drew, a dominant powerhouse in the ACC. It's hard not to look at them as the favorites to win the ACC tournament, let alone make it to Omaha and possibly bring home a World Series title. They haven't been there since 2006. I don't think you can argue that there's no shot that they make it there this year. The Jackets have just been rolling. The pitching staff is unbelievable to watch it. Honestly, some days in some series it looks like an MLB farm system out there with the way those guys are able to operate, come in, step in one after the other, and close out games. I really think Georgia Tech has what it takes to make a deep run this year. It's just going to come down to consistency. Something that I did want to note is the fact that if you look at their home record, they are 30-3 in Atlanta. But when you go on the road for Georgia Tech, they're just 10-5. So they got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. When you go into another team's environment, which it doesn't look like they're going to have to do until possibly they get to Omaha and they're playing at a neutral field. But you've got to be able to step up when you're not in familiar territory, playing teams that you haven't faced the entire season. That's all what the postseason is about in every single sport. You're playing teams that you haven't seen the entire year in different conferences. So if the Yellow Jackets are able to cruise into the ACC tournament, have a good performance, maybe even bring home the title, and then host the regional, get into Omaha, I don't see how you could pick against them, but they do have to have a little bit of consistency when it comes to these teams out of their territory.
Yeah, Joe, I'm glad you brought that up. Both of these teams, Georgia and Georgia Tech, have not had the best success on the road, especially in conference play. And when you have two favorable sites in your home location, and you're probably going to be playing at home until you get to Omaha, that helps a lot outside of those conference tournaments. Ryan, 42 wins in only 50 games. That's going to be the first time in program history Georgia Tech has done that. Head coach in his first year. This is just the team that's buzzing, and I don't think anyone's going to be able to stop them, at least until they get to Omaha.
Buzzing. I absolutely see what you did there. A ton of credit to James Ramsey. When we talked about the Jackets, about 5-6 weeks ago, coming off of that Florida State series, this was the perfect storm for James Ramsey. He's a young, energetic head coach. He was a great hitter in college in his own right. He's well respected in the coaching ranks, but he was also a part of Danny Hall's staff. He knew where the changes needed to be made, where the program needed to be modernized, and on top of that, he was the recruiting coordinator. Everybody who was already on this roster came because of James Ramsey. They wanted to play for the Rammer, but what's interesting to me, you already talked about it, this is a team that hasn't been as great on the road, and before we go to Charlotte for the ACC tournament, you're going to get an interesting little road test here for the Jackets. Heading to Boston College, who's been a pesky team, one of the surprises of the ACC this year. Of course, stubbed their toe last weekend against the Clemson Tigers. They lost 2 of 3 at Doug Kingsmore Stadium. But I am interested to see, the Eagles are a good team. They're a well-rounded team. Could a little bit of bird ball up in Brighton, Massachusetts give Rammer the guys trouble before the ACC tournament? But the one thing I will say, there is a certain thing. Yes, it's a new era. Yes, you have a new head coach. But sometimes those demons of the past, those trends and traditions in baseball or any other college sport, they have to be overcome. This is a Georgia Tech squad that, need I remind you, despite having some great years, despite having some great teams, whenever I think great Georgia Tech players, Buck Farmer always comes to mind. Of course, ended up pitching for the Tigers for a while, was a dominant ace for GT, but he never won a regional. 2006 was the last time that Georgia Tech has made it out of a regional. I want to see them do that. I want to see them exercise that demon. Again, I get it's a new coaching staff. I get it's a new day. But more talented, well, I don't want to say more talented Tech teams compared to this one, but very talented Tech teams have had their own regional and have fallen flat. I want to see them buck that trend before I really think, okay, this is a team that can go to Omaha, and this is a team that can really make some noise. I believe Rammer and the guys can do it, but sometimes you are what you are until you aren't.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that, Ryan. And regionals is a huge test for that, and that'll be in just a couple weeks from now, and we'll be talking about Georgia Tech and the Dogs hosting regionals. But speaking of Dogs hosting regionals, UGA softball announced last night, thanks to the NCAA selection show, the 10-seeded Dogs will be hosting, and what I feel like they have half the state half the states of Carolinas with Clemson, UNC Greensboro, College of Charleston, all coming to Athens this weekend. Third time under Coach Baldwin, they will be hosting a regional round in Athens, all beginning on May 15th. Joe, this is a good feat for Georgia softball after an impressive run in the SEC tournament. You feel like they're ready and can get past these three teams to get to a super regional?
I think it's going to be tough. I think they got kind of a tough draw here, especially having Clemson coming into this regional. We know how historic of a program Clemson softball has been, and whether they're having the best season or not, it's just kind of like when you see Alabama football on your schedule and you get a little bit of worked up because it's got that script A on there. That's kind of what Clemson's paw print logo would do for me in the softball world. But Georgia doesn't discount anything that they've done this season. They're one of 9 SEC programs that's getting to host a regional, so that's an accomplishment in itself. I believe that tied the SEC record for most teams to host a first-round regional, so that's incredible. But Georgia has got to dig deep if they want to defend home turf and get out of this series still alive and survive in advance, because they haven't had the best season of those 8 other teams in the SEC that are hosting regionals, but the Dogs are certainly capable of getting out of this. But Clemson is going to be the biggest test if the Dogs end up having to face them to get out of there.
Yeah, absolutely. And go through the SEC tournament. Patrick Murphy, the head coach of Alabama, said it on Saturday night that, this tournament is just a gauntlet, and it prepares you so well for the region and the regionals and the super regionals when you get down to it, because you just went through the hardest conference in all of college softball, especially with Texas and OU joining just a couple years ago. It's a mega conference now in the world of softball. Ryan, what do you think the Dogs have to do here to get to a super regional?
Show up and play Georgia softball. Clemson has been a very good program since they've come into existence over the last decade. But looking at this ACC, looking at how this year was, covering Florida State and seeing how they've handled some of these teams, this was a conference this year that was Florida State, Duke, Virginia Tech, and a chasm, and then just about everybody else. Clemson has taken a little bit of a dive this year. They certainly have that championship calendar DNA. They know what it takes to win at this position, but the Dogs are just more talented. The Dogs are just better. They've gone through a much tougher league in the SEC. I think Georgia, really, if they just play their game, they don't let themselves get into their own head, this is a team that can roll through this regional into a super, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. Also to mention, Georgia Tech, one of the last 4 teams in. We'll see what the Yellow Jackets can do, if they can scrape by, but still nonetheless made a regional. All right, that's enough baseball and softball talk on the college side, but the Atlanta Braves returning home this week after a long West Coast road trip. We'll recap it all coming up next on The Pit. All right, we're back on The Pit. We just talked Georgia Tech baseball, Georgia regional hosting this upcoming weekend, and of course the Atlanta Braves finally back after a 9-game West Coast road trip. 6-3 overall in the trip, pretty impressive. Seattle series kind of struggled a little bit. Ryan, I'll start with you. What'd you think of the Braves over this sunny West Coast trip?
Oh, they lost a series. The season's over. It's done. It's done. Listen, of course, this is as good as it gets for Atlanta. Spencer Strider looked absolutely great against the Dodgers. We know Dodger Stadium has been a house of horrors for the Braves. It feels like, what was it, a 9-game losing streak going into this series in L.A.? To go in, to take care of business. I know it's on the screen right now. I mean, Matt Olson has been so good. He's legitimately going to put himself in NL East conversation as far as the MVP is concerned. NL conversation, not NL East. Can you imagine if we did division MVPs? Anyway, enough of me tangenting. Olsen has been so good. Strider is starting to hit his stride. But there you see, right there on the bottom, the Cubs are coming to Truist on Tuesday. The first team since the Dodgers did it in 1955 to have 2 9-game or more winning streaks at this point of the season. The Chicago Cubs are. This feels like an unstoppable force versus an immovable object. I cannot wait to see these two play this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, your thoughts on this past trip and how these Braves are continuing to just roll through?
Yeah, I think it was incredible to see them finally win a series in Dodger Stadium for the first time since 2023. There was a tweet going around that said the Braves haven't won a game in Dodger Stadium since 2023. Then after they got that first win of the series in Game 2, the next tweet was they haven't won a series since 2023. So being able to knock both of those off the board was definitely a good confidence boost for the 11th series win of the season for the Braves, and we haven't even hit the mid-mark of May yet. So that's an incredible stat already. We talked about how the Braves didn't even hit 20 wins until June last year. Well, they're at 28 now. They're on pace for 115 wins. That would be 9 better than the season that they had in 1998 where they won 106, which is the franchise record for them. So it's a great time to be a Braves fan. I think with the Cubs coming to town starting Tuesday night, that's going to be a huge test, because one thing I keep hearing is the Braves haven't played anybody. Well, how do you play anyone when you're the best team in baseball? You're on the top. It's hard to knock off the champ when you are the champ right now. You just took down the defending World Series champions and series on the road in their territory. Now you come back home for a 6-game stretch against the Cubs and then the Red Sox. I think they got a great chance to play the Cubs tough and honestly win the series or outright sweep them. We've seen how the Braves can perform at Truist Park this season. They have been almost unstoppable. Matt Olson, as you mentioned, Ryan, looks like the NL MVP frontrunner at this point. He is just absolutely launching baseballs, and whether it's a 9th inning home run, solo home run like we saw him do in Game 3 against the Dodgers, or he's putting a huge impact in the early parts of the game. Matt Olson has continued to be the hero that the Braves need when they need him most. Mauricio Dubon with a bases clearing double in the game on Sunday to bring home 3 runs. That's just stuff that we didn't see from the Braves last year or even the year before in 2024. When the Braves had runners in scoring position, they could not get them across home plate to save their lives. So to see the entire offense step up as a whole has been a breath of fresh air, and it's really nice to see that this is continuing. It hasn't so far just been a spurt of offense and then everybody goes stagnant, maybe aside from that series in Seattle, but to see the consistency that they have had on offense, not to mention Bryce Elder looking like a potential Cy Young candidate, as crazy as that is to say with how much flack he's caught in the world of social media over the last couple years by Braves fans. So everything is clicking right now. Ha-Seong Kim is coming up because Eli White is now on the 7-day concussion protocol after we watched him make that miraculous catch off a Max Muncy hit in Game 3 Sunday. So the Braves have guys that can step up when they need them most. Ha-Seong Kim is going to be a great replacement for Eli White until Eli is able to get healthy and return to the rotation. So a lot of things cooking for the Braves. I don't see them losing this series to Chicago starting on Tuesday.
Yeah, it's going to be a great test for them. These are going to be 2 teams right now that are I think the Cubs are the 3rd best team in baseball right now, if that still holds, but they're the 2nd best team in the NL, and it's going to be a great test when it comes down to, all right, you got to run through this gauntlet of the NL when it gets to the playoffs, and it'll be great to have that atmosphere at Truist Park for a couple midweek games. And the Cubs have been riding high on some big win streaks, but I'm glad you mentioned Bryce Elder. I got it down and checking the stats last night after that game against the Dodgers. Best pitcher in baseball, believe it or not. I saw a tweet there was like comparing him between Paul Skeens. They're like, are we ready for this narrative yet? That he's got better numbers right now than Paul Skeens, but everyone's rolling right now. Dubon has been great. They kind of have this next man up mentality. Dubon's like, great, put me in left field. Like, here comes Ha-Seong Kim. He's going to play shortstop. Like, they're rolling right now, and if they can keep this going, success looks good. And if you keep that going, it's a long season. We're over a quarter way through, but being at the top right now is a good spot to be in. Obviously, 115 as the projected wins. I don't know if that'll hold up. We always get to this point of the season where teams are like, hey, they're on pace to break the record for wins, but it's a long season for a reason, and everyone has their ebbs and flows. But Braves coming up this week, Tuesday night versus the Cubs. That's going to be a great series, and of course they'll finish off the weekend with the Red Sox. But the NBA draft lottery was Sunday night. We still got a lot to talk about. The Hawks had a 40% chance to land a top 4 pick and just didn't really fall their way. Well, we got to talk about it coming up next on The Pit. All right, welcome back into the pit. Before we go, we got to talk about NBA draft lottery. The Atlanta Hawks land the 8th pick in the draft after having a 40% chance to land a top 4 pick, and even I think it was 12% chance to land that first overall pick, but landing where they were projected to land with the 8th pick overall. Joe, I'll start with you. 8th pick, what were your kind of expectations going into Sunday? Did you think they were going to get a top 4 pick, and what do you think of their options there at 8?
we can talk about the NBA draft lottery and how, official it is, but we don't get to see the balls drawn live on TV. And that's my biggest gripe with it. I want to see the lottery balls come up out of the machine so I can at least tell myself that this is not rigged. But we did see the Hawks get the first overall pick 2 years ago, and it was one of the weakest draft classes we've probably ever seen. And I didn't foresee the Hawks getting the number 1 overall pick this year, but I don't think I saw them getting as far back as 8. Drew, we talked before we started recording the show today that the fact that this draft class is so deep, having the 8th overall pick, not the worst thing in the world. There are so many guys out there that you can pick up for the Hawks' young roster right now. And we've talked about this on previous episodes of The Pit. This has been a season for the Hawks that was all gravy. You didn't expect to make it to the playoffs or even sniff the play-in tournament at one point. And then they just turned it around. They made it into the playoffs. They got 2 games over the Knicks, who have just swept the Sixers, and they're moving on to the Eastern Conference Finals. So the future is bright for Atlanta, and if you can just find any one of these guys and just pick them up as a rotational piece or a potential starter, I think you're in good shape, because I didn't see them having the number 1 overall pick. I maybe could have seen them being in the top 5, but I still don't think they'd lose an advantage being down there at 8. Now, if we were talking about the late teens or the middle teens, then that would have been a little bit of an issue for me as a Hawks fan, but I don't see Hawks fans being too upset about having the 8th overall pick.
Yeah, I think having 8 with just how deep this class is with college talent that we've been able to see, like, Hawks need a guard. We're not sure. I'm pretty sure McCollum's deal is up, and we're not sure what they're going to do with him. But if you could bring in a legit point guard to pair with Johnson and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, this is a class to do it with the depth. Just because Darius Acup's a really talented player. I don't know if he'll stick around to 8. Kingston Flemings is another great one. Michael Brown Jr. Ryan, who do you think the Hawks should kind of target here with that 8 pick?
Honestly, I'm with you. I think a guard could be certainly a place to go. Yeah, the Hawks ended up getting the 8th pick. It's one pick for every field goal that they made in the first half of Game 6 against the Knicks. So, sorry, I've been waiting on that joke all day. I have to say, to the earlier point, listen, you want a good player, and the good news is this is a draft where there is depth in terms of what you're getting. Yeah, you didn't get the top 4 pick. Yeah, that stinks. Yeah, the odds were in your favor. Yeah, the NBA draft lottery is dubious, to say the least, to the casual fan or the average fan or anybody who really watches this and raises an eyebrow. I mean, remember, what was it? The Cavs got 4 straight first overalls or whatever it was. What was it, about a decade and a half ago? I don't know. I'm older than you guys. But what I am trying to say is this. If you're going to have a draft where you pick 8, it may as well be in a year where you made the playoffs when you weren't supposed to, and you made this great run when you weren't supposed to, and you're playing really well, and you're gelling behind Quinn Snyder and his philosophy and what he wants this team to be. And by the way, you can still get a decent player. I think a guard will probably be where they go, depending on where some of those pending free agents end up. But overall, no matter where you go, as long as you get a decent, productive player, you're going to have options there at 8. And you can't always say that about the NBA draft.
Absolutely, and I think having draft capital helps, especially with this team that, they made the playoffs. They won 2 games against the Knicks, which seems like a pretty good feat right now when you look at what the Knicks just did to the Philadelphia 76ers. But having pick 8 and pick 23, draft capital might help if you want to make a move, especially with Giannis Antetokounmpo announcing that he is seeking a trade from Milwaukee. I know there's some other teams ahead of them that have capital that are willing to go out and get Giannis, but definitely a great situation with what you have to kind of facilitate with the free agency, figure out who you want to keep and who you're trying to look at when it comes to the draft and all the logistics sense of that nature. But Washington Wizards getting the first pick, probably going to be A.J. Debonsa, but a ton of talent with just how deep this class goes. I think the 4 or 5 guards that may be there at 8 may have been top 4 picks in a couple, like that 23 draft where the Hawks had that first overall pick. So you got to take the wins where you can. You're like, yeah, we got the 8th pick, but this is such a deep class that we're walking away with probably a starting point guard, starting shooting guard when it's all said and done. But hey, that's all the time we got for this episode of The Pit. Thank you for joining us, and check back in next week on Monday to catch everything Georgia.